Hello, here we are again with Mookie Tenembaum. We are exploring, as you know, his disillusionist philosophy through these videos. We are trying to understand his misalgic theory about human behavior as a way of avoiding suffering. And week after week, month after month, for a while now, we've been trying to apply some of these rather abstract concepts to everyday life, to actual facts as they develop around us. We are now almost in April 2022, very much amidst the COVID-19 pandemic, as we've been since the beginning of this exercise, but also taking a look at the events in the Ukraine, also minding what's happening there with the war and the conflict. This is the second video we dedicate to that matter. So we are going to further analyze matters in the Ukrainian theater of war from a disillusionist point of view, of course, and also to try and understand what's happening as the conflict develops and evolves.
Well, in the first part, we spoke about the one 2 weeks ago, and I say 2 weeks ago, we spoke about is the Ukrainian war a fiction? At that time, when we were only 2 weeks ago, the war in Ukraine was the only news, the most pervasive item of news everywhere. When I mean everywhere, I mean really everywhere. I read the newspapers from around the world, including India and Indonesia, places really far away. And in all of them, the Ukrainian war was stopped. And then the first news and the second and the third. And you had to go really down to find either kind of news, sometimes not even. 2 weeks into the war, we are now in a very different situation. The war is still there, it's still raging, but it's not raging in the news. That means we have 7 pieces of news before we talk about the war. So in England, it's very important that the 5p went down of the price of the duty on oil. The United States talks about, of course, all the issues that have to do with the politics, the economics, the new Supreme Court judge. I mean, we're talking, and then also the war in Ukraine. I'm not talking about the New York Times or 1 or 2 newspapers which, as a question of prestige, they like to bring international news, and that is the international news. Outside of the US, the World Cup in Qatar, that's going to happen in November, and the playoffs are everywhere. They talk about that. They talk about Ronaldo's 1,000 record of scoring in soccer, but not only that. Yes, in Argentina they talk about the IMF, and in Spain they talk about the strike of the transport, and in France there are elections which are imminent in April. And at the end there is also Ukraine, a little bit of Ukraine. Now, even in France and Germany, which are very close to the theater of war, the news are not the most important one, they're not the main one. What happened? Why that happened? To understand what happened, we should this time look, I think, not outside of Ukraine, as we spoke about last time, that for all of us who are outside of Ukraine, war may be a fiction. And I recommend, if you haven't seen the first part, see the first part. But in what we're talking about in this case is that the inside of the Ukraine, people are living theoretically in a state of war. Or do they? Well, the main city where most of the victims are, and the most tragic news come from Mariupol, a port on the Black Sea, which has been under bombardment every day. There is no light, there is no electricity, there is no running water, there is no heating, there is no gas, there is no internet. That's what they say, even though we still see scenes from Mariupol. If there is no internet, that would be interesting. But interestingly enough, internet has not been cut off anywhere. I don't know if you see. I mean, we're talking about a terrible war, devastating war. Internet is working, really. So this is a question, why? And the answer is, people start getting accustomed to it. In Mariupol, harder to do it. But if you go to Kiev, for example, the capital, which has been totally almost all surrounded by Russian troops, once in a while they get missiles and even airplanes buzzing on the city, and you have an embattled president speaking on Zoom all over the world. I mean, the whole thing. But yesterday they opened the fish market. The fish market was open, and there was fresh fish, and there were cigarettes, and there were wine, and all kinds of things, illegal things. Illegal wine is illegal now in Ukraine. Still, there was there. There is a currency. People pay with credit cards. I mean, things have not broken down. This is very interesting. And if you go even further to the west, further from where most of the battles appears, that's closer to the Polish border, the big town of Lviv. In Lviv, last Sunday, they made an art installation of 100 little children carriages, empty children carriages, to show about the war. But normally when you are in the middle of the war, you don't do art. So there is nothing. If you look at the city, and please watch, then you will see people going about their business, everything open, food is not scarce, nothing. There is no need of almost of any sundries, nothing. So what do you say about this, Florencio? What's happening?
I have at least two questions to ask you. One has to do with something we have discussed before many times. I think it's a favorite topic in many philosophical schools, which is the matter of habits and habit formation. So I wanted to ask you about the possibility that inside and outside we are getting, so to speak, habituated to the whole situation. And that's why we are not sensitive enough, maybe, to the news we get, and that's why we are disregarding them, and the media outlets are not offering this news to us. And maybe even on the ground, people are somehow subject to habituation as the war slowly goes on.
Well, we know from the disillusionist point of view, it's very easy. We sleepwalk, and when we sleepwalk, we don't suffer. Thus, our tendency is to sleepwalk as soon as we can. How do you sleepwalk? You have habits. The first time it's not it's an exception. The second time it's a coincidence. The third one is a tradition. Yes, it becomes a habit very fast. So people having now habits, and they used to go to the market to buy fish in Kiev. Yes, and in Mariupol, even though the country, you still have to take your dogs out. As a lady who got stuck in one of the theaters, she went to walk the dogs. I mean, you walk the dogs in the middle of a war, theoretically being bombed. There is also there is not only philosophy here. There is politics here. The Russians may be intent on to get things out of the news because it was making them maybe a big bad propaganda. Maybe the Ukrainian government wants to let people give them confidence because habits at least show confidence to the other person. Every time I do the same thing like I normally do, the other guy says, "Oh, this shouldn't be a problem. He's walking the dogs." So that kind of thing, there is a convergence of reasons, but always the tendency is to have habits, and the habits that you can do. Of course, I'm sure that in Mariupol they are not thinking about doing an art action, artistic action. I'm sure they're not, but whatever they can, they will. And this is how it works, because when the news are going down, not only for us, also for them. Of course, they will still think about the war in the Ukraine before the Qatar, before the Qatar eliminatories for the playoffs for the World Soccer Championship. But by the way, Ukraine is one of the countries that's supposed to be that maybe had to go to a playoff, and it was postponed. Well, I guess it was postponed. But look, they're still postponing it. We're in the middle of a very serious war, apparently. Once in a while, the Russians want to get everybody wake up, and they say, "Okay, we may use atomic bombs." So everybody scrambles. But that, and you see also in the market, you see the prices of commodities have leveled down. That's it. A little bit more, a little bit less, but they're there. The prices of Russian commercial paper, yes, all the stocks of you have of the oil companies or the gas companies, they're at the same price. Nothing changed. The whole thing, everybody got accustomed. So if the market they get accustomed, you imagine everybody else that they are very sensitive to that.
The second thing I wanted to ask you about, you mentioned the differences between people in Mariupol and people in Lvov and people in Kiev, and I'm sure there are many more subtle differences, even in the ground, on the ground. So my question was, doesn't this point back to the old, at least for us, old concept of illusion, in the sense that there is no Ukraine as a whole, in the sense that it might even not be a war as a whole, but just this skirmish and that individual and this special particular situation?
It's easier to think in the concept of Ukraine, yes, and but Ukraine does not exist. You know, okay, but everybody talks about it. Yes, everybody talks about God, and He doesn't exist either. So talking about something doesn't make it exist. It makes it sometimes, interesting enough, a source of suffering, but that doesn't mean it exists. Because suffering happens here. So if you believe there is a God and God is punishing you, you are going to suffer, even though there is no God, and of course there is no punishment. So the whole thing of Ukraine is an illusion. There is no Ukraine. And as you say, the word skirmish, I just don't want to use it because people may think it's just, a little thing. No, it's serious. A lot of people are dying. Yes, this is not, I'm not being dismissive about it. I'm just saying people get accustomed also to dying. Yes, let me remind you that when we have the pandemic, we got accustomed that 700 people died every day in several countries. Every single day, 700 people, which is about the amount of people who died, civilians who died during the whole month in the Ukrainian war. People get accustomed even to death, of course. That's what happened in the Second World War. This is something that we're talking about habits. We're talking about sleepwalking, and that. But I want to quote. There is a biological correlate to this. In the animals, this exists in animals, and it's very interesting. There is a biologist. His name was Levy, and Levy found that. He began with sharks. He saw that sharks, when food is aplenty in the sea, they just travel in a straight line. If there is scarcity, if suddenly there is not enough fish, they change the way it goes, and it starts trying to cover more areas to find fish. This is called Levy's walk. That's the name of it. It's called because he discovered it, but it's not only with sharks. It's with many birds, especially seagulls. Yes, but many birds do the same thing. They change. So what we are seeing now in Mariupol, in Kiev, is Levy's walk. We are just animals. But let me remind everybody, I have to keep reminding everybody, we are just animals. So normally in the animal, we will find the reason we behave. Of course, we talk about it, and then animals do not have internet, but probably they're lucky. but remember another thing, and this is, having said, just don't want to forget this. Media responds to what people want. The reason Ukraine is not in the top of the news is because people are not interested, because people are not clicking and not watching the news, and automatically the program in those websites changes and brings what you are motivated. Qatar, football, whatever. The weather in Antarctica, or the weather in Des Moines, Iowa, yes, in 2 blocks from you. I am sure we all check weather much more than they were in Ukraine, certainly. Now, this is only 2 weeks ago, just 2 weeks. The whole war is one month, and in 2 weeks, incredible, but expected.
It's quite amazing, quite amazing. We are out of time already. I'm sure these patterns of human behavior and animal behavior will come back to haunt us in future videos, but it was interesting to look at them as the war progresses. Thank you very much. See you next time.
See you next time.
If you enjoyed the video, please like it, comment and subscribe.